All right, so I'm recording. Welcome everybody. This is the end of week 7.
Oh my gosh! Stop
Can you
it!
believe it? How is that possible?
Crazy. Wild.
So good.
It's amazing. So just like one more week with y'all. I'm sad.
I thought it was 2 more weeks. Really?
Isn't it? Wait. Isn't
I
it
thought it was
saying
2 more.
One more week.
Just one more week.
One.
Oh, I was not ready.
I know, right?
Claudia, it just got broke to you.
Oh. Tears.
You heard it here.
So this is a learning module week, and Caitlyn is going to be our learning module. Caitlyn, along with Stacy, were in Cohort 1, and very much like Mindy, got a job kind of in the middle of the cohort, and so has written some blog posts and done some presentations on that transition from coding bootcamp to first kind of real job. So she's going to talk about that a little bit after we do demos. So you know how demos work at this point, so I don't have to explain it for the 4th time, 5th time, 7th time, I guess. Yeah, right. It's once every week. You're right. So who wants to go first? Kind of demo your stuff from this week.
We can go.
Let's see it.
Okay. I am going to present our ACs and also to show a little bit about how it works. What it looks like as it's working. So how's the screen share going? All good on your side?
Looks great.
Nice. So for week 7, we had to do the following. As a user, I want to delete items from my shopping list in cases where I made an error entering the item or where I know I will no longer be buying the item in the future. And there were 4 kind of specific things we had to accomplish. The user is able to delete an item from the shopping list. This operation can be done either from the list of items or on the item detail page, which turned out to be more interesting, actually a point of discussion, but we can cover that later. Prompt the user to confirm that they really want to delete the item to prevent accidental deletions, and deletion should cause the associate records in the database to be deleted. So whenever we went about doing it, what we ended up getting was something that's very similar in appearance. If you follow any of those things, we'll delete Hamburg. If you follow it to its items details page, this is where we stuck our delete button because we decided that where it said or, that meant it could be on the list page or the details page, and we like it on the details page. So whenever you hit delete, first you get a lovely pop-up that verifies that you actually aren't making a mistake. You can hit OK, and you can see, if you caught it down there very quickly, I'll even do it again just so you can see. Delete Moo Juice. Yes, delete Moo Juice. Switch. And I didn't hit the pop-up. But, boop, boop, boop. Moo Juice is gone.
There it goes.
Yeah.
So good.
And now I believe Mindy will show you a little bit about how we figured out the logic.
Yeah. It actually turned out that I had written a little bit of the logic already in the week previous, doing the Cypress custom command was all the figuring out how to delete. But it was actually pretty in line with what we've already done with a lot of our Firestore stuff anyway. So it's just adding a different piece here at the end. So we basically just added a button to the item details that would, when it was clicked, we'd get an alert, and we would go ahead and delete that entry upon clicking, and then we'd set the redirect to true, so that way it would go away from the item details page, because then you'd get an error because there wouldn't be that item in the database anymore, so it would pop up with an error. So we wanted to make sure that redirected. Another item of note was that I realized at one point, I'm like, wait, if we have a item that's never been purchased, then we couldn't get to the view more button anymore because we had taken that off because that was causing an error a while back. So I put that back in basically and made it so that if there was a date of purchase, then we would have data that would be assigned to particular variables. And then if not, then we would just mark it as none. So I used state of is new item, and I set it to true at the very beginning, and then if there was a date of purchase and associated with that item, then we would set it to false. And so that would just change what that looked like in our item details page. It'd either say none, or it actually would have the purchase date information. And then the test, we actually just did one test for this guy, and basically just created an item, visited the item details page, clicked the delete button, went back to the list, and just making sure that the item is still not there, or is not there anymore. So there we go. That's all I wrote. All
Cool.
we wrote.
Beautiful.
That's all she wrote.
I'm done.
Nice. Very good. Any questions or feedback or anything? Yeah, looks
Nope.
great.
Do you want to do a demo, Michelle, and I'll do the code part?
For sure.
Sweet.
Okie dokie. So our AC was display a text field at the top of the shopping list. As the user types into the field, the list narrows to include only items that contain the text the user entered into the filter field. When the field has text in it, the user should be able to tap a UI element and X to clear the field. Okay, so we didn't really focus on CSS in this one because we figured that would be this week. So this is our field, as you can see. And if I type in, let's see if there's I'm going to type in another, because there's a few items here with that. You will see it start to filter just those. And then, and then if I push X, it clears. Sorry, I forgot about that one.
Very good.
Fantastic. Cool. That's it. That's a really cool issue. I like that one.
Yeah, I have to say that was harder than I thought it was going to be.
Well, it's a very familiar thing to Stacy and Caitlyn is like making a database call for every one of those as you're typing and running out of our quota and stuff.
Yeah,
too, so.
Yeah, we definitely did that. So we created a button, or we created an input and then a button. So that was the easy part. And then I realized that we had this object here that already existed for the database calls. So I decided to, instead of making a database call every time we type, to use this object instead. So created this handle filter change function, and then also created a filter array function, which basically filters the items that are equal to the filtered input, but only up to like the length of the filtered input.
Okay.
And does that make sense?
Yeah. Can we actually go back to? Can you show the UI again?
Yeah.
I have a case that maybe you're not handling. So, I think from what I just saw, it's starting at the beginning of the string and like working its way into the string, right?
Yes, exactly.
So I think it was supposed to be like anywhere in the string. So you could type if you type PP, it would match Apple.
Oh,
interesting.
Yeah. But I'm not gonna make you go back and do it again. But that would be a much harder problem to solve probably, even though.
What happens if you type PP?
I don't think that would work. Nothing, because it's looking for to match the first two letters.
Okay.
You know. Yeah.
Well,
okay.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. It's okay.
Criteria says.
Yeah.
It was a short week, and we had to redo.
Yeah.
It's totally fine. Totally fine.
Yeah.
I just
we
noticed
didn't
that
have
slice
anything.
zero.
We had nothing by
that,
Thursday, and then by Friday we crashed Firebase.
Yeah.
Considering all that, I think you did an amazing job. That's great.
Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, so then you just end up modifying the object after you filter.
Oh, yeah,
Actually,
that
I mean,
acceptance criteria is very vague. As the user types into the field, the list narrows to include only items that contain the text the user entered.
uh-huh.
So it's like, it's there, but it's still very much like, I think what you did still satisfies that criteria technically. You know, like it contains, like it does contain that.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway,
Twist.
I'm actually really impressed that you used filter. That's a functional programming construct that's not super simple to understand and implement. So good job for that.
Lots of Googling. Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
Since we're kind of on the subject, I didn't really get what was happening with why Firebase crashed. And now I think I'm making sense of it. So it's just before it was asking the database every single time every keystroke happened. But now it's looking through just like the information that's local on the website and not going out to Firebase every time. Is that true?
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
Yep, exactly.
I would have had no idea.
Well, and actually, was it calling? I know it was every keystroke, but was it also making a call for all of the? Is it just one call for the whole database, or is it a call for every item in the database?
Ooh.
No, it's each time you make a query. So you would have been getting the whole list every time.
Okay, because it was within a for each, so I didn't know if it was calling it every time.
It's getting the collection every time, like the
Okay.
full collection. So every keystroke would get the full collection. I think that counts as one query to the database.
Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering when this is, available to the public, like we could easily run out of Firebase, whatever you call it. So yeah, okay.
For sure. Yeah, you would have to, if you were going to make this into a real product and put it on, like let people use it, you would probably need more than just the free level of quota.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which means you would charge those users.
Yeah, or have advertising or something. Yeah, then you get into like business model stuff, which is not, it's kind of out of scope for what we do. But nice job. Well done. Very good.
Thanks.
Any questions or feedback on that one?
I just want to say on everyone who talked and presented, that was amazing. I don't know if y'all have seen the app that we created in our cohort.
Don't go looking for that, please.
Don't go looking for it. Yours is way better. It looks super good, and yeah, I'm so impressed. So excited.
Also, you all are so buttoned up on your demos now.
I know, I love it.
So impressive.
Yeah.
I love the demos. That's great.
Wait, can we?
They're
see
so good
your
at
app
them.
when we're done next week?
Can you do it?
Do what?
Can we see your app next week when we're finished?
Yeah, it's like a present.
See it whenever you want.
You want?
But the repo's right there. You can.
It's like black
Go
and
ahead
white, no styling.
Sorry for bringing it up. It doesn't exist.
But yeah, Caitlin, I'll let you take it away. I'm really excited to have you back.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Let's start sharing my screen.
What's your dog's name?
My dog's name is Bandy,
Bandy. That's cool.
and he has been a lot of effort this week.
Oh yeah.
For him. He just we stayed in hotel rooms and he just barks the whole time. And it's like,
Oh.
But he's very sweet. Can y'all see my screen?
Sure can.
Yep.
Cool. Cool. So I'm happy to be chatting with you. I guess I should have thought of this before I started sharing my screen, but I can see your little faces. I was just curious if everyone could go around and do a 20-second blurb about who they are and if they're in a boot camp or what their situation is. And yeah, I'm curious so I can know who I'm talking to.
Sure. I'll go first since I'm at the top. I guess never mind. So I'm Claudia. Is everyone at the top?
I was just thinking that too. I was kind of gonna say the same thing. Then I was like, oh, wait a minute. Nah, it's not just me.
I'm sick, you guys. I'm Claudia. Civil engineering background, and I also have a 3-year-old. Well, he's 4 now. 4-year-old son. So I decided to stay home with him and learn the code and learn web development. So I'm just teaching myself. And it's been fun, but also, I mean, I've learned so much through this just by having like feedback and all that stuff.
Nice.
Who's next?
Well, you already know me because we met in person.
Hi.
But I don't know if we actually talked about. So I'm actually still in it. I haven't touched it in a while, which is gonna be fun when I jump back into it. But it's an online coding school that I've been doing. Finished the back end a few months ago, and I've just been working my way through the front end. It's called Launch School, and it's a kind of self-paced, mastery-based learning program. And yeah,
Nice.
And you just accepted a job.
I did.
Yes.
Exciting,
So
congrats.
proud of you.
Yay! So happy.
I can go. I was in advertising. I'm based in New York. I was in advertising, and then I quit that to get into web development. I went to a boot camp, and then after I did the boot camp, I actually moved to Hawaii and did a boot camp, and then moved back to New York. And when I moved back, I wasn't like really on my ball with like getting a job and everything, so I kind of fell off the job search and coding and whatnot. So I did this to kind of get back into it.
Nice.
I'm Ethan. I started learning to code a little over a year ago and just kind of messed around with Python for a while and different meetups until I started figuring out that I like the sort of web development material. And I haven't done any boot camp or anything, so this is kind of like my first chance to use a lot of GitHub and code with other people and get a lot of feedback and all that stuff. So it's been pretty awesome.
And Alejandro, I don't think you know Caitlyn. Do you?
I don't. Now I know. Now I do. So anyways, let me introduce myself. So I'm Alejandro. I work with Andrew and Stacy at Zapier.
Oh, cool.
I don't know, and I enjoy sharing what I know with people in the Collab lab.
Yeah, so Alejandro is one of the mentors.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Is that everyone? I'm saying that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Nice to meet y'all. So my background was before I did Collab Lab, I was going through boot camp, and while I was doing Collab Lab, I was going through an online, also kind of self-paced boot camp. So it was remote. I was the only one. I didn't have any of the like pair programming experience that I got in Collab Lab. So this, what I'm about to talk about is kind of a reflection of my experience, but I think it is going to be similar to people who are doing like a self-taught route because, yeah, I didn't go that route, but I think a lot of similar stuff will apply. And yeah, I will just kind of start chatting. So I'm 2.5 months into my first job in tech as an associate software engineer at a company called Zapproved, which is in Portland. And it's been really awesome so far. I've had a really positive experience. I work with really nice people who are very supportive of me being a newbie and asking a lot of questions and not knowing what's going on a lot of the time. So yeah, and then like I already said, I was in the first cohort of Collab Lab, and that definitely helped me get my job, being able to talk about that. So I want to talk a little bit about how my boot camp experience related to the job, and then a little bit about how I talked about Collab Lab in interviews. Can you see that?
Sure can.
Yeah, okay, you can see it all. Cool. So in boot camp for me, I got to start every project from scratch. And I think it's similar when you're self-taught. You build these projects on your own, and it's super great because you get a clean slate and you get to build whatever it is that you have in your head. And it's definitely still challenging, but the blank slate is such a blessing that I didn't realize I had at the time. Because as soon as I got into my job, I work on a team of about 60 engineers, and our company is 11 years old. So there are definitely companies with more engineers and that are older that would be even more challenging. But in my job, there are so many thousands of lines of code, hundreds of thousands. I don't even know how many lines of code there are in that code base. It's insane. There's so many services, and there's been probably 300 to 400 people working on it over the course of 10 years. And it's been in different frameworks at different times, and it's constantly being migrated. And it just makes it so much different. Just trying to understand the code base has been such a huge task for me with most of the projects I've worked on, the tickets I've worked on. And another one of my big problems has been that I'm very much learning by reading that existing code. I did React in my boot camp, and I got hired into an Angular and AngularJS. Turns out we use both on different services in my job. And so I'm learning Angular oftentimes by reading the code. And that's not always the best way to go, because I'll copy exactly like the style that was done in one part of the code, and someone will say like, no, that's not good. Someone wrote that poorly 3 years ago. And I'm like, well, how am I supposed to know that? So there's definitely like a huge difference between, like my experience in boot camp with writing code, and then like, it's great to be able to learn from existing code. It means you're often not like reinventing the wheel, but sometimes the code that you're looking at is not what you're aiming for either. And yeah, we'll definitely have questions at the end, but if you want to pipe in at any part along the way and say something, go for it. So the volume of code has also been hugely different. When I was in boot camp, I could get, an app like bootstrapped and like up and running the first few pages in a day. I'd write 200 lines of code. I'd be super stoked. I'd feel accomplished. And in my job now, it is way different. I spend so much time, like I said, reading the code base. I'll write one line of code, then I'll have to research, and it won't work, and I'll break things, and I'll run tests, and then I'll maybe write another line of code, and then I'll just delete everything. I had an experience in my I think it was just last week in this sprint, where I spent a day and a half and I wrote maybe like 20 to 30 lines of code, and I was like trying all these things. And ultimately the solution had been to change one single word in the code. And that was the solution. And my team was like, well, we didn't know that either. Like we point our tickets for depending on how difficult they are. So like a 1-pointer maybe takes you a day. And this was a 2-pointer. So they thought it'd maybe take 2 to 3 days. So no one else knew it was a word right off the bat. But I felt kind of silly because, yeah. But that's just the reality of it. And the sooner you can make your peace with that, the better.
Wow.
Hey, Caitlin, can you explain a little bit what the point system is like?
Yeah, so I know it's different at every company for sprints. Like when I shadowed Kate at, what was her Sitebox, her company, I know they literally looked at like 1 point per day. So when you're planning a sprint over 2 weeks, you might look at your team, like my team is 5 developers, and you'll see like who has time off. Like we have 10 possible days, but how many days of those get deleted for people having time off, or right now holidays. And then we kind of like, they would look at like each day remaining as a point, and that's how many points the team can take on during a sprint. And I know, at Kate's company, kind of people would get assigned a certain number of points. At my company, it's similar, but we just commit to a number of points as a group, and it's a little squishier how many of those like translate to days. Like the most points I've done in a sprint is like 6, which was a lot. I think I got lucky on that one. And like one sprint, I only even did like a subtask of a ticket. So sometimes you get 2 points done, sometimes you get more. And my company has a lot of meetings, so it's very squishy how many points you can get done at any given sprint. But you always look at that for like a 5-point ticket is going to have a lot of ambiguity. There's going to be a lot of research involved, whereas a 1-point ticket is going to be very straightforward. And that's kind of how point system has worked for me.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So then the quality of code has been an experience, also getting used to that. In boot camp, I was just so excited when I could make something work. I mean, I still am. But then I realized that there's a lot of hurdles to get over in my job. After I make it work, it has to be readable for everyone else, people that I don't even work at the company yet, people I don't even know. I want them to look at my code and understand what I'm doing. And then I also like naming variables and functions has gotten super important. So that's something to consider. I want it to be consistent with the current code, but at the same time, like I've said, I've had this conversation over and over again with my teammates is, do I make it consistent or do I improve it? And so there's not always a one answer to that. It might change depending on what you're working on. And then I'm guilty of sometimes it'll take me a while to figure out what makes my ticket work, what solves my problem. And so I might have a ton of code and something has solved the problem, but then there's a bunch of code in there that doesn't actually do anything. And so I really have to go back and almost delete one line at a time to figure out what it is, make sure I know that I don't leave any code in there that doesn't do anything. And then I'll submit all of my code and my changes to my team, and 9 times out of 10 they'll make suggestions on how to change it, which is awesome because that's how you learn. But then you have to like go back and keep working on it, and writing more tests and everything. And it has to go through at my company. Once you submit your ticket, it goes through your teammates. So someone on your team will approve it, and then it will go through QA. So we have a dedicated tester on our team, and he'll test it, and then it'll go to our product manager, and then finally it'll come back to us and we will push it to production, the final code. So there's a lot of steps, a lot of people that have say, oh, and sometimes they'll go through our UX person depending on the ticket.
So like when you're getting all this feedback on your PRs, what has that been like? Like, are there certain people that you like really look forward to their feedback because it's really kind and helpful? And then are there any people that it's like a little more aggressive or like harder to navigate? What's that been like?
Yeah, well, dome of silence over this little chat here. But I would say there's definitely like someone on my team that I know if he's the one looking at it, I'm going to get a lot of feedback. And like, sometimes that's good, but sometimes I know that I'm going to end up having conversations with him where he feels very strongly in black and white about a lot of things. And there's other people, like at one point, someone else on my team was like, your stuff looks great, and approved it, and I merged it. And he came back and was like, I actually would have made like 8 changes. I was like, oh, okay. I don't know. Like there's definitely a line, and it depends on timeline also. Like I want to write the best code I can, but it's a certain point, it's like Friday, the sprint is ending. You just want to get it done. You just want to get your ticket across the line. And sometimes you have more time to, debate various aspects.
Also, have you been getting to give a lot of feedback too? What's that been like?
I am starting to do that. I have been nervous to do that because I'm the most junior person, and I don't right now feel, whether it's true or not, I don't feel qualified to be the person to approve PR. So I'll like write comments in the code, or I'll write them a side message like, looks good to me, but I will never be the one to like actually mark it as approved. So that's one of my goals for the next few months, is to be the person to do that, because there's so much of our code that's super over my head. And yeah, and so much of the code base I'm unfamiliar with. I'm like, I don't know, should you have changed this one word on that document I've never seen before? Who knows? But yeah.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, is there an emphasis like on do this quickly, or is there an emphasis on do it right, or you have to do both, Like, is it kind of expected that if you say, hey, look, this got really complicated, they'll know, oh yeah, you're right, it is more complicated than we thought, so it'll take longer?
At my company, there's much more emphasis on do it right. So I don't know how that is other places. I'm sure other places have much more emphasis on speed, but I really like it because like it's been hard for me to adjust. I come from a sales background, so I want to like quantify everything. And I was talking to my manager early on, like how many like points am I supposed to go through in a sprint? What does success look like? And they're like, you can't quantify that because like the most senior developer on our team last week took a 3-point ticket, which for him should take 3 or 4 days. And it rolled over after 2 weeks. It rolled to the next sprint because it ended up being way more complex. And so we ended up like having a design meeting about it and like talking to the team and talking to other teams and like kind of chatting about what should be done. And like no one was remotely upset that it was taking longer. And that's like another thing I feel like with myself, I struggle with that. Like I was talking to my partner about like, oh, I'm nervous because I only had like that one time I had one subtask to do in a whole sprint. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get it done like before the end of the sprint. And he was like, well, what will happen? And I was like, I'll feel bad. He's like, will anyone be mad? And I was like, no. And he was like, well, anything else happen other than you feeling bad? And I was like, not really. So yeah, I think at my company, at least, it's more about getting it right and collaborating with your team and with other teams to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
That's cool. That sounds good to me. Like that would be the place I'd want to work at eventually.
Yeah. So another thing I've kind of touched on is how much time I spend in meetings. So when I was in boot camp, or I imagine the same with being self-taught, for one, you don't have too many meetings. And coding was most of what I did with my time. And I thought I would end up in a job where I was coding all the time. That just seemed like what I was signing up for. But no, there are tons of meetings all the time. At my company, I have 2 to 3 meetings a day, depending. There's always stand up every morning. So that's like our 10 to 15 minute chat in the morning just to touch base with each other and see what we did yesterday and what we're planning to do tomorrow or today. And then we have design meetings, like I mentioned. We have meetings there's our team of like 5 developers plus our QA plus our UX plus our product manager, and we'll have meetings, and then there'll be meetings there's 3 similar teams like mine that will all meet together, and we'll do demos at the end of our sprint, and we'll do retrospectives, and we'll do code review, and we'll plan for our next sprints. And there's so many meetings. I like it. I'm a social person. I want to talk to people and learn from them in all these meetings. And I know that there's companies that don't have this many meetings, but I think a huge part of the job that I did not realize would just be like talking with everybody about what you're working on and strategizing, getting on the same page. If you don't have like designated architects, you kind of have to work that out amongst yourselves. So yeah, there's a lot of collaboration, and I love that. So, but be prepared. And then the timeline has been a big adjustment to what I was used to in the boot camp. In boot camp, everything goes super fast. I remember like learning React in a couple weeks, building a React app in 2 weeks, and then having a test, and then you move on to another framework or whatever you're working on next. And it just goes super fast. And kind of like I said, I had that one sprint where I spent 2 days and ended up having to code 1 word. There's been a lot of sprints where you just have like 2 little tickets, and maybe you just have to fix a button, or you have to like write only a couple lines, and it'll take a couple tests, and it'll take you a few days to do that, partially because there's a lot of meetings and there's a lot of other things going on. Partially for me, because you have to, even with more senior developers, they have to know how what they're writing affects the whole code base. And that can be really hard to understand sometimes. And and then just getting it kind of perfected. And at every level, I've talked to, people who've been doing this for 20 years. There's a lot, obviously, of Googling. I'm sure y'all do that now, but it's amazing how much of that kind of persists and how much time all my coworkers spend on Stack Overflow and looking at stuff and trying to figure out how everything connects. So it's just things move a lot slower. But for me, I kind of like that because it gives you, I don't feel rushed. It gives me more time to like let things soak in, chat about them with people, like sleep on it at night, and come back to it. And but at the same time, it's like we'll be working on a product that a customer wants, and it'll take months, not years, to get it to them because it's just like, slow pace. So then I wanted to talk about, in my interviews, I definitely talked about Collab Lab, and I felt like it was one of the things I felt most stoked to talk about, and I just felt like it was super beneficial, especially in the job that I got. They were very excited about me having this kind of experience. And I think the obvious stuff is like teamwork and collaboration and pair programming. Being able to do this, it shows that like people like to work with you, and you know how to like talk with people and work together, and you're not just like in your own bubble of writing code on your own, because that's not how it's likely not how it's going to be in your job. So that is such a good thing to be able to chat about and just talk about. Hopefully you like being on a team and you've enjoyed this experience. It sounds like everyone's had a really good experience, so putting a positive spin on that. And then I heard y'all talking about it earlier, but the agile practices and terminology is like, it's not exactly the environment, but it's very similar what you're working in right now. And doing demos, and you work on something together for a week, and then you review each other's code, and then you go back and do retrospectives and demos. Like that's how it works on a lot of teams, and that's super helpful to know. And I did not learn any of that stuff in boot camp. I had no idea like what a sprint was or like anything, what agile was. And getting that experience, it's going to make it so much easier for you to assimilate onto your team and know kind of how the flow of things goes, and just be able to follow what's going on. So that's a good thing to bring up in interviews, is just that you have that experience. Merge conflicts for me was like, that's still a pain. Every time I have merge conflicts in my code, I kind of want to cry. But the first time, I don't know if Andrew and Stacy remember this, the first time I had to deal with a merge conflict, I had no idea what was going on. And I was like, I'm so glad this is in a safe environment right now where I can be completely lost and confused, because it would have probably been embarrassing to go through that feeling at a job. So the fact that y'all are able to kind of see those and know what's going on and improve your code based on like PR feedback that your other teammates give you is really valuable. And then the last thing, I feel like y'all went out of your way to apply for Collab Lab and get into this, and because you knew that it would help you level up your career, you knew that it would help you fill some knowledge gaps, and that shows that you're super proactive and awesome. So I feel like just talking about that you are the kind of person that sees where you might need to improve something and you go out of your way to go find it is super cool, and employers are going to love hearing about that. So yeah, and that's pretty much all I have to say. So yeah, questions?
It's amazing. And
so
just
amazing.
From the time when you started Collab Lab to now, you talk like a different person. Like you're like a developer now. You know what I mean? Like you're like dropping. Oh, we have so many services. Like 10 weeks ago, did you even know what a service was? You know what I mean? So it's really fun to see amazing how you've kind of learned and grown over that time. So super cool.
Cool. Are we gonna get these slides on Slack or something? This is really, really useful. That would be awesome.
This is super awesome. Caitlyn also has tons of resources on her experience that you should all check out, because you're kind of like, we're all kind of going through the same path, and it's like really helpful to see and hear her insights. So
Mhm.
follow her.
Thanks, Ace.
Nice. Will do.
So cool. Any questions for Caitlyn? You have her here. Starter Mindy, maybe you have some questions. You know, the fact that you're starting your job soon.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Oh, I don't know that I have too much. I mean, it's interesting to hear because I already know that Sitka is going to be a little different. Like just from your discussion of what's like gets approved, I think about what I've heard from the people at Sitka, and it's interesting to hear. Like I think they're a small group of people. I think there's probably 30 of them, maybe. So it's a smaller company. And they're a consulting firm, a professional services firm. So they're building tools for environmental conservationists. I always want to say that wrong. So they work with a lot of different agencies like Metro here in Portland area, and I think they work with different tribal groups and that sort of thing, and they're building different tools and working with different tools. And I think it's for one, it's not one code base. It's actually like each team has a few different code bases because they're working on a few different projects. So that'll be interesting. I feel like jumping in and trying to figure out what's going on with each of the different code bases will be interesting.
Yeah. And also like, it kind of sounds like you might have a similar experience. My company is corporate legal e-discovery software. So not only I had no idea what they were talking about in terms of the code. I had no idea what it was we were like building and selling. Yeah. Like you have to learn terminology that's not even related to code. Like it sounds like you might have something similar. So it's a lot of learning.
Part of one of the interviews was and that was actually an Angular too, and I had never touched Angular either. Neither of the interviews. The first interview was with C# and I had never done anything with C#. So that was fun. And Visual Studio I had also never done anything with. And apparently that's different than Visual Studio Code. Who knew?
Yeah, I also did not know that before I started.
So during the second one, they were talking about the evapotranspiration rate or evapotranspiration rate. I was like, oh God.
Obviously, everybody knows that.
Yeah. And I just, so that was fun. So yeah, I'm sure it's going to be a similar thing where it's just like, what is that? Is that a coding terminology, or is that but
Andy, are you saying you had a interview that was like C++ or C# and then an interview for Angular, but you don't do either of those, but then you got the job? That's really cool.
Yeah.
Good for you. I don't understand. That's awesome. I bet you're a good interviewer.
Yeah, I actually do interview relatively well.
Nice.
It's hard to get to that point. Like I really struggled with getting interviews at all. That was really my big piece.
Do you two know how many applications you put in a piece?
30-ish.
What about you, Caitlyn?
I think just about 10.
Okay.
Yeah. And
That's not like 300 that I've
odds.
heard of on the internet. Yeah.
And I also got hired in languages that I hadn't learned, and actually C# and Angular. So, and I didn't know either of those. So I wouldn't have applied for that job even if someone wouldn't have recommended me for it, because I would have thought I don't know any of that stuff. So yeah, interesting that we both got hired in languages we don't know.
So apply for all the jobs.
Yes, apply for all the jobs.
Just apply for them all. You might hit 300 faster than other people, but
wow.
And I have heard that too. Like there's actually been a lot of people I've talked to that they eventually got a job, but it took 300. And I will say, actually, the only reason that I applied for this job was because somebody, like I had looked at it and was like, oh, it's C#. I don't know that. I'm not going to worry about it. Like this is just a low likelihood, so it's not worth my time right now. So I didn't apply to it. And then somebody from Women Who Code, the local Women Who Code organization, was like, hey, you should check this out. Like I got pretty far in it and I didn't have any experience with a lot of it, and give it a shot. And so I did. And I'm glad I did. And I think I only got the interview. Most of the interviews that I got because I knew somebody at the company. And that was like one.
build your network.
Nice.
Yeah, but two actually, because I might have one of the interviews I got. I don't think that anybody put a referral in for me. Yeah, totally. It's the network thing. Like that's really where I ended up getting in. And I did with the one with Sitka was actually, I found somebody on a PDX Women in Tech Slack who worked there. I just Googled Sitka and did in their search bar Sitka and found somebody. I was like, hey, you work at Sitka. I'm thinking about applying there. What is it like? And she ended up being one of the hiring managers for that particular.
Oh, awesome.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
Nice. Jackpot.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
Well, that's great. Any other questions for Caitlyn?
So it was an amazing presentation.
Yeah.
So good.
For
I'll
sure.
share
So
with you on
glad
Slack.
you could join. I was already tweeting about it.
Oh, I'm gonna send my tweet.
Yeah. Send tweet.
Yeah, it was nice to meet y'all, and I'm so excited you're going your last week of Collab Lab.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
It is.
It's
So good. It went
sad
so
when
fast.
when it ends. I know. It does. It always goes fast. I don't know how that happens. Anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you, Caitlyn, for joining us. It was so
Cool.
great. Thanks everybody for your hard work, and 1 week to go. Let's do this.
Yay,
Nice.
for a week.
Nice job. All right. Take care. Have a good night,
Bye.
everybody. See you later.
Bye.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Bye-bye.